So let's see if we can get the old.
And then he comes back with, I have the scorecard.
Yeah, I can get a score. I drank there, but I tell people what I did. I drank on the 18th hole. And I think we're going to go to. Let's speak with Mike Commito. You're live here on rawmikerichards.com.
Hey, how's it going?
Mike, am I saying buongiorno? Come va?
Actually, I'm more French than Italian these days. My wife is French, and my daughter speaks French exclusively. So yeah, I've lost the Italian.
Yeah, I was going to say you better be careful with that, right? I get it. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for joining us here this morning on rawmikerichards.com. We actually just talked to a gentleman named Craig Campbell who works at the Hockey Hall of Fame. He goes around with Phil with the Stanley Cup, and it was interesting talking about just the way in which the Hockey Hall of Fame works and its relationship to the history of the game itself. And what you realize when you start looking at the history of hockey in this country, it almost is a defining cultural element. They talk about the fabric of a culture. From the moment we get up at 5 or 6 in the morning, depending on when you played hockey when you were kids. It doesn't matter if you're Sudbury or Prince Albert, Calgary, Nova Scotia. Our circumstances are similar. That's why I think sometimes when we get to this level, and we talk to mostly professional athletes, professional hockey players, they're all very similar in makeup. It's very different than other professional sports, and I think it's one of the things that we truly embrace and hasn't changed, even though the game has, the equipment's changed, but the kinds of individuals who play it tend to be very similar, and I think that's why sometimes as professionals, when we interview athletes from different sports, it just seems very easy to talk to a player in the National Hockey League.
Yeah. I mean, I think that even outside of like you mentioned it, I think for a lot of Canadians, it is that unifier, the thing that a lot of us, are drawn to in a very visceral way, whether it's, watching on television, following our favorite teams. Even for me, I just think about, I live in an area in Sudbury where we're pretty close to the outdoor rink. And one of my favorite sounds when I come home from work is that sound of the pucks just pinging off the iron when the kids are out playing at the outdoor rink. And so, because that reminds me of the days when I was younger and I was playing at an outdoor rink. I didn't grow up playing rec or competitive hockey, right? I played a lot of my hockey just on frozen ponds and backyard rinks. And so for me, whenever I hear that sound or when I hear kids on the rink and their blades are cutting through the ice, it just really takes me back to that time when I was younger. And again, that kind of informs the passion that I have for the game now, because again, I don't play hockey. I was never the greatest hockey player, and that's kind of why I think I was drawn to the history behind the game, is because I love the sport, but I also love the stories that go along with it, and the connections that we form with the players and some of these really iconic moments in the game.
Yeah, you certainly do, Mike. Great talking to you. David Bastel here. Of course, for our audience listening to us, watching us on YouTube on our live channel right now, you can follow Mike's work on Sportsnet, Vice Sports, Detroit Athletic, and so forth. Has a book coming out called Hockey 365. What was your introduction to the game of hockey as far as working on it, writing about it, and how did you fall into this sport like all of us here on the set today?
Yeah, so for me, like I said, I was always drawn to the sport as a youngster, but in terms of actually getting into it and covering the game and writing about the history of the game, that didn't really happen until maybe 5 years ago. I'm actually a professionally trained historian, and my grad work actually focused on environmental history, and I was doing I did my PhD on the history of bear hunting in Ontario, so very different from most of the writing I do today, which is about hockey. And it was during that time in grad school where I kind of figured that I could take the tools I developed as a historian and apply that to some of my passions, which were hockey. And so I kind of blended the two, my love for the game and all the years I put into following the game with my skill set as a historian. I figured that was a way for me to kind of blend the two together. And so for there, I started just writing locally for the local newspaper, doing NHL previews in the context of historical moments. And then I kind of branched out and started doing some work for Vice Sports and Sportsnet over the years, and really tried to establish myself as a hockey historian in the world of hockey again with a Twitter account where I bring daily hockey history moments every day. And then also in that account has really kind of spun off and has really informed the format that I have for my forthcoming book in September. So again, for me, it was just kind of, I came into it, I guess by happenstance. I'd never, I'd always really loved the game, and I thought of it as that'd be great to work in that someday or do that type of writing. But it wasn't until a few years ago I really realized that could be an actual possibility. So it's kind of been the thing I've been pursuing on the side as much as I can.
Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the year when it actually does get released, but just to throw a little bit of a taster out there. So September of 2018 will be the book launch of Hockey 365. What can viewers expect when they actually get a chance to read this book?
Yeah, so as the title suggests, it's Hockey 365, and so the reason we've called it that is because it is a hockey history moment for every day of the year. So what I've done is think of a word of the day calendar, but now think of it on steroids, and that's really what the book is about. So every page there's a moment from every day of the year. So for example, October 12th, 2016 for Maple Leafs fans, that would be Austin Matthews' electric 4-goal debut. So I write about that, and then I write about actually 366 moments because I included a bonus one for leap year. So again, if viewers, if they're familiar with my account where I do daily hockey history moments every day on Twitter, it's similar to that, but I've taken those snapshots that I do online and kind of expanded them so they're now more. It's really 366 300-word stories that take a specific hockey moment for every day of the year and explore that a little bit more.
We're in conversation with Mike Commito here on RawMikeRichards.com, author of Hockey 365. Once again, Sportsnet. You've got Vice Sports and The Athletic. You can find his work, obviously, on Twitter as well. And I'm just curious, as you're going through some of these historic moments in this book, 365, as you said now, 366, is there one for you personally? Because that's the one thing about sports moments is a lot of people recognize a certain date. There are a lot of people who are familiar with certain magnificent moments in that sport. But then, like a lot of people, because of what's going on in your life at that time, there are some that are more closely related to your own life than others. Do you have one like that in this book?
Yeah, I absolutely do. So, and it's funny because for the most part of the book, I tell it from a very removed perspective. I'm just trying to narrate these moments, but there is one story where I actually, I'm involved in the story itself, and that was actually, and I just mentioned this, was when Austin Matthews had his NHL debut and he scored 4 goals in that really electrifying night that I think a lot of Leafs fans were just on the edge of their seats. And the reason that resonates so much with me is because we just had our daughter was born, and so that was the first night of the season for the Leafs that I was watching. And so she was, again, just 2 weeks old. She was wearing little Maple Leafs pajamas that were still a little too big for her because she was born 2 weeks early. And so even though she was sleeping throughout most of that game, she spent that game. We were both just saying to each other, I can't believe this is happening. This is a review. But for me, it's always going to resonate with me because I'll always remember that I watched it with Zoe, right? And so hopefully, when she's older, I'll be able to tell her about the times that we watched hockey games together, especially that one memorable night. And I'll have to tell it to her in French because, like I said earlier, she's exclusively speaking French these days. But I'm sure by then my French will be up to snuff.
Well, ironically, our executive producer, Russell Graham, was also wearing his Maple Leaf pajamas when that happened. And, although he's 37, so it's it's an awkward story.
Hey, you're never too old for me.
That's right. So, and again, these are, and I have to think really carefully about moments. And again, and I'm going to show a clip actually of my uncle, who's now passed away, but Guy Gunnar Kinnear, who was the longtime trainer for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But the moment, I think, because it was personal, was the Daryl Sitter 10-point night. I remember watching it, and of course, every time, I shouldn't say every time because that's back in the day that even when you scored, sometimes you stayed on the ice. Those shifts were a lot longer back then. But anytime he'd go to the bench after one of those goals, and there's my uncle putting the towel around it. But I think for me, like a lot of Leaf fans of a certain age group, the Daryl Sittler 10-point night probably stands out for me. What about you, Dave? Do you have? I'm assuming it's a Dale Hawerchuk, but it may not be. Like overall, all NHL, what would your date be? Not necessarily you need to know the date, but the moment.
Well, you know what, you talk about moments, and a lot of times it's just like you guys were referring to. You like to be there or have some sort of historical reference to it. And I'll surprise you with this one. It's going to be a Winnipeg Jets story, Mike, by the way, the two Mikes on the line. Is I was at Teemu Selanne's record-breaking goal against Stéphane Fiset in the Quebec Nordiques net, and I'll still remember remember to this day, on the far boards off the wall, they used to hang banners at the Winnipeg Arena, the old Winnipeg Arena. Rest in peace, by the way. And it says, Bossy 52, 53, 54. The goal is no more. Selanne is the true king of rookies, right? And he scored the goal, and him coming across the ice after he dekes out Facette, puts it into the empty net, throws his glove up. The place went berserk, and of course, we still bug him to this day. Dallas Aikens not being able to catch the glove when Selanne throws it up in the air, the former Maple Leaf Marley guy.
Yep.
And yeah, I was in that building for that, and that historical year for Selanne, the 76 goals, was amazing because you wouldn't really care if the Jets won. You just wanted to hear Selanne score 2 or 1 or 3 or whatever it was. But I was actually at that game against the Nordiques when he broke the record.
Hey, Mike, I've got a question for you. You brought up the whole bilingual thing. I'm curious because hockey at times is so regional that if you're a francophone, are you even, like what would Daryl Sittler's 10-point night? I mean, I would think if I'm in Montreal or an area that's heavily French, that book is going to be 95%, even if it was when Maurice Richard took a dump in the second period and smoked 3 cigarettes at the same time. That might make it before Daryl Sittler's big mark. Is there a difference, do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that at the end of the day, I think that there is still going to be those regional cleavages, throughout the country, regardless of, obviously Sittler has the NHL record, but for a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans or even Boston Bruins fans, that's not going to resonate with them the same way that it does for Maple Leaf fans, despite the fact it is such a spectacular feat. I mean, even in my own family life, my father-in-law, as I mentioned with the bilingual thing, is obviously a Montreal Canadiens fan. So for him and I, we have very different opinions on even where players rank in history. Again, he's of the mind that Maurice Richard still didn't get as much due as Gordie Howe did in those eras. And so for him, I think ultimately it's still going to come down to a lot of the game's iconic moments and players that are rooted in Canadians history. But yeah, for sure, I think that you talk to anybody and I think that from my perspective, I'm kind of in that insular world where, again, a lot of the people I follow, the people or the things that I write about, or the things that I hold dear, kind of in that Maple Leafs nation. And so I think that's kind of where the book kind of takes a little bit of liberties there, is that I've tried to make it appeal as broadly as possible, because obviously for me, I could have written, 365 Maple Leafs moments, but again, who's going to buy that? I'm sure a lot of people in Toronto, but I'm trying to try to make it as appeal to everybody in Canada, and even more broadly than that as well. So again, I do have the Daryl Sittler moment in the book for sure, because I got to talk to him for Vice Sports a couple of years ago when we did a Q&A for the 40th anniversary of that big night. But yeah, I think that knowing that, again, those lines kind of are still there across the country, it's important that I've kind of tried to spread the wealth as much as I can.
Well, it's a fascinating book in one, and I guess if you figure, it's one that the book kept going every once in a while. You could literally probably bump certain moments for moments that are happening, because when I take a sort of a look at the stars of today. So you mentioned Austin Matthews. Obviously, there's going to be a Connor McDavid. Within a year or two, you have to think there is going to be some magnificent moment with some of those players. It could be a Mitch Marner. I mean, you just really don't know which way it's going to go. But the odds of Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews doing something historically noteworthy in the next couple of years, I think that's going to happen. I think the odds of it happening got to be pretty high.
Oh yeah, and I mean that's just it's funny because as the book is still going through its copy editing phase now, so I mean it's still, for the most part, it's finalized, right? But even as I'm watching this NHL season, there's moments that stick out where even though it's not maybe historically significant in the sense that it's a record breaker, and that's not all. I didn't focus on just record breaking moments. I try to pick stories that are interesting or that people will connect with. And so even more recently, last week with the Blackhawks emergency goaltender, right? That would be a really interesting story to include there, just because of how great of a feel-good moment that is, right? Hadn't played as, he's a rec hockey goalie, but gets to go into the game, makes all 7 stops, including a few great ones against, Patrick Laine. And so that would be one where if I had the opportunity to maybe add a little bit more, that would be a great one, just because of how great it is for, everybody for the people that play rec hockey. Like, that would be the dream, to get into an NHL game, even if it's just on the bench, but this guy got into the play, into the action, got his name on the score sheet. And so that's just an incredible one. So yeah, maybe it'll be a Hockey 365 Part 2, where we can look back at some of those other moments that were bumped. Maybe taking a look at some of those more feel-good moments that aren't record breakers, but are certainly things that we would kind of place a premium on.
Oh, that's great stuff, Mike. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today. Appreciate it. The book looks fantastic. Once again, it's Hockey 365, daily stories from the ice, which I think would be, and it's a great gift as well. So I appreciate that. I was going to say grazie mille, but I'm going to say
au revoir.
Au revoir. Okay, I said that.
Oui, merci. I really appreciate that you guys having me on today.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Take care, Mikey.
Okay, thanks. Talk to you later.
That's Mike Commito, once again, author. And, sometimes you think, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Exactly. No, very good.
Très, très bien. Mon-tu d'asseoir la vie en mettant mes noms de dire, tu vois.
What? We just become best friends? Yup.